My name is Harold Hunt. I'm a research economist at the Texas A&M Real Estate Research Center.
My name is Bucky Banks. I am an associate professor with the Mays Business School and the Masters of Real Estate program.
We actually have another co-author that's not here, but the three of us have worked on several articles, and this one in particular is about AI, artificial intelligence. We're thinking it'll be a series of 3 articles. This first one is to really hit the basics and sort of give an overview of the topic. The next 2 articles will be much more in-depth.
One of the first things we wanted to ask was, what exactly will be the impact on a day-to-day basis for brokers from the perspective of people who are leasing space, trading space, and things of that nature? I think that you'll start to see more and more brokers being able to use things like geofencing, being able to work through the content of a lease, or being able to highlight the risks in a lease to a given tenant, or be able to highlight inside of a contract certain details that the resident or the tenant otherwise wouldn't be able to find as quickly. As a consequence, you're going to see an increase in trust between the people that they're working with and the brokers themselves, and potentially also the ability to have increased efficiencies.
You've got to have the right model first, and then you've got to have the right data to put into it. But once you have that, then you've got something that can do a lot of things for you. It can look through leases, pull out specific things in a lease. It can do property management functions. On the appraisal side, it can help you with estimating values. So it's going to be an assistant. It's going to be another tool, I guess, to help you do your job more efficiently.
One of the challenges that every single broker has is going out and finding appropriate comps. A lot of times it's up to discretion, and you find that the broker's having to approximate by space, but then they find that the quality of the space might be slightly different. The location might be one that is, even a little bit off of what they might consider to be an optimal road or an optimal corner with respect to proximity of other businesses. They'll find that, well, how would they be able to crunch the numbers? Well, a lot of times it's discretion. A lot of times they tend to find that it's experience. But when it comes to somebody who may not know where those fine-tuned elements are, the information sometimes is scarce. The information is harder to come by. And experience often wins the day. But when you have tools that can more or less create a model, looking at a lot of how those comparables have been analyzed, a lot of how the value has been deduced based on location, based on the age of the building, based on the quality of the fit-outs, brokers will be able to monetize information that previously would have taken them 10, maybe 15 years to kind of fine-tune. Now you're able to optimize for that information through a machine learning system earlier in your career. Now, would that create a certain degree of competition in the market that maybe previously didn't exist? I'm sure that it will. Will that create a downside? Potentially, but ultimately when you think of what that downside is, it's really just those brokers who potentially are not increasing to refine their relationship with the tenants. Because when it boils down to kind of an egalitarian or an equal playing field in terms of information, it now boils down to the skill set, the interpersonal skill of the broker themselves on being able to maintain those relationships, gain the relationships, or otherwise improve what their marketability is.
So there'll still be a lot of human involvement. I think you're seeing a lot of skepticism at this point that people are afraid it's going to take their job. I don't see it that way. I see it more of an aid or an assistant.
When you have AI that potentially is working with landlords for the management of the building, you'll see that the cost to operate it from the perspective of utilities, the cost to operate it from the perspective of repairs, a lot of the different operational expenses that right now, if you can catch it before something happens to it, then you've saved yourself. But buildings are busy structures. There are communities that have many, many moving parts, and very often what you tend to find is that you simply catch as catch can, and then when something breaks, you repair it. With AI or some sort of assistive management structure, you're going to be able to see what's happening with respect to airflow. You're going to be able to see what's happening with respect to utility or electrical pull. You're going to be able to see what's happening with respect to the water pipes and their either degree of quality or relative to generation over time. And with those kind of tools, you'll see that landlords will reduce their operating expenses. Now, you could make the argument that that would mean that the profit share on part of the landlords is going to go up. But the reality is that if markets are reasonably competitive, if you have other entrants, the second again, other developers or other investors see that the margins in that particular area are particularly robust, it's going to attract investors. And this, of course, is going to benefit most of the residents, because what happens when you attract investment from the development perspective, you tend to see more units or more space appear. And naturally, this is going to create a greater degree of competition, which benefits tenants or benefits residents. When we think about this broadly, I think that AI will allow us to solve a lot of problems that right now we simply don't have the man hours to solve. If you want to get in there and try and figure out exactly what the power draw is on every single unit, when it's optimized with respect to what point in time of the day, which systems are working, what exactly the age of every single pipe is, or where you might see water flow minimizing or optimizing. They're just simply things that, well, most of us don't want to pay for if we can simply wait until it breaks. And the wait until it breaks method is one of the most costly methods of operation. And to some extent, it creates a certain degree of risk on part of the general populace or the user of the space or the resident. And as a consequence, you tend to see that, well, if we can avoid that, we can create a lot of value. One of the things that first comes to mind when I think of optimizing for the quality of a given piece of equipment or a given utility are elevators. Nobody wants to be in an elevator when it's getting towards the end of its usable life. I mean, I'm pretty sure they've made a handful of movies that have focused on scary moments like that. So if you can have a simple AI system that steps into a space and says, well, you know what, this cable is wearing at an uneven rate relative to the other units. To John Q. Public, we say, well, this unit was installed in 2011 and so were the other ones. I'm sure they're all fine. But you know what? Every single machine has its quirk. Ultimately, the investment analysis is only as good as, at this point, a reversion to the mean. And so we tend to look at comparables, we tend to look at similar markets, we tend to look at the market as a whole and try and say, how does this particular asset or how does this particular region or area or even neighborhood or block reflect what that region as a whole is? And when you have investment analysis that can crunch all of that data, provide you with a much more refined analysis, or provide you with a much more refined mean, then you're going to find that, well, you're going to make investment decisions and subsequently choose prices or select rents or negotiate leases that will have outsized yield compared to just that broad reversion to the mean of saying, well, we're going to pick 3% because we think this is going to be a relatively stable market, or we're going to assume operating expenses are going to be 40% of our gross revenues. It could be that, 15 years from now, a student signs an apartment lease and the landlord says, I'll give you 10% off if you allow me to monitor pretty much everything that goes on inside of the apartment from respect to turning on utilities, consumption of electricity, opening and closing doors, and general use of water. Now you might think that that's something that's really innocuous, but one of the first things that comes to my mind is that you can figure out how many people are in a given room based on how often the thermostat kicks on, because every single person outputs a relatively constant amount of body heat. So you couldn't have a private meeting, you couldn't have two people going in there because they could simply say, well, it kicked on twice as frequently. So when you think about privacy concerns, ultimately, every single bit of valuable data is ultimately data that hinges on privacy. So from an operations perspective, will there be a point in time where profit margins tend to creep towards what we consider to be relatively innocuous elements of our privacy? Consumption of utility, consumption of water, tread, things like that. It certainly will be. Will people actually recognize that it's creating some amount of risk from their privacy's perspective? Perhaps not. One of the things you have to keep in mind is that as AI is deployed inside of every single built environment, the built environment transitions from being simply a structure to now a piece of technology. And if technology has proven to do anything, it's consume a fair amount of power. When you think about the amount of power draw that a really simple computer uses, it's de minimis. When you think about the amount of power that a computer that is for instance, designed for gaming uses, it's considerably more. Now, if you were to create a building that had that level of scale, you'd see that the power draw would be extraordinary.
It takes 10 times the power to answer a chat GPT question versus just a simple Google search. So you're talking about massive amounts of power as this gets to be more and more popular.
We wanted to capture the most essential aspects of the industry just from day-to-day working perspective. What does a broker do? How do they target a client, or how do they target a tenant? And we wanted to ultimately say, where will AI either potentially create value, or where will it potentially destroy value? Where will it reduce friction, and where will it maybe replace something that previously was a system everybody's comfortable with? And so we started from, the building itself and the relationship that the broker has to the building itself, right on down to the building as a unit separate from the broker, interacting with the environment, consuming power.